My name is Dr. Leila Latif, and I am the chair of the Committee on Fiscal Studies, which is based at the University of Nairobi, and I am an international tax advisor to the UNDP and the African Union.
All right, so Dr. Leila Latif, the Committee of Fiscal Studies has been at the forefront of this conference in Sevilla, has been advocating on a lot of issues. Could you please tell us what the action of the CFS has been till date, from the start of the conference to now in Sevilla?
Thank you very much for your question. It's a very important one. And I'd like to start off by telling you what CFS is about. CFS is the Committee on Fiscal Studies, and it is a committee that has been set up to challenge, to influence, and to engage on matters touching on public finance, particularly the fiscal policy. And the reason for this is really key, right? When you look at the global south, which is made up of African countries, Latin American countries, Asian countries, the Middle East, and certain Asian countries, we're seeing a lot of power asymmetries that have taken place in the design of the financial system, in the way in which the IMF and the World Bank, with their projects and their programs, have created discriminatory access to trade markets. So with CFS, what we try to do is that we try to bring to light some of these concerns so that we can now find global south solutions towards countering these problematic asymmetries we're seeing in the global financial system. So here at Sevilla, it's very important because it's a continuation of the discussions from the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, where the conversation about empowering the global south started. The decision about ensuring that we have international cooperation that is fair, that is just, that is effective, that is transparent, that is accountable, began with the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. But the problem with the Addis Ababa Action Agenda is that we haven't seen implementation at full scale. So Sevilla is a chance now to be able to go hard on, fast, in terms of redesigning our fiscal systems, our global financial architecture, our design of policy making at the international level, so that it becomes more fair for developing countries going forward. And this is what CFS is here to do. CFS is here to talk about the importance of not just reforming the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. It's about creating an alternative fiscal and financial architecture that is going to stand in the limelight, that is going to stand as the voice of resonance of fiscal legitimacy and fiscal responsibility for the global south. So here we are to say, we don't want the World Bank and the IMF anymore. These institutions must be dismantled because they have colonial undertones. And they're the ones that have created this power asymmetries and wealth inequalities that we are seeing. So there has to be an alternative. And the Committee on Fiscal Studies is proposing this alternative. And this alternative is being proposed through what we call the House of Fiscal Wisdom. And through the House of Fiscal Wisdom, which is an entity, a company limited by guarantee, set up in Nairobi, of which I am a co-founder, we are going to be setting up a commission on financing development. That commission is going to set up the institutional design and the principles needed to come up with a new global financial architecture, which is a proper outcome of Sevilla 4 as part of the compromise. The compromise of the Sevilla outcome document speaks about the need to reform the global financial architecture. We're saying we're not here to reform. We are here to dismantle and create a new fiscal system. Thank you.
So, just one quick question on what you just said. The actions taken, the commitment taken in Addis Ababa 10 years before hasn't really been up to standard. Now with the Sevilla action and all that, do you think there'll be change? Is change possible?
I think the question of whether change is possible is really a difficult question to answer at this particular point, because 10 years ago, we didn't know that we're going to be seeing war at the scale that we're seeing in Ukraine, in Sudan, and in Gaza, as well as now the recent attacks on Iran as well. So things keep changing. The political landscape keeps changing every now and then. 10 years ago, we didn't know that we're going to be leading ourselves into the United Nations Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation. We didn't know that we're going to be calling for a convention on debt, right? That was 10 years ago. There was no hope then, but a lot of people, a lot of countries, a lot of civil society movements, a lot of academics are beginning to see the importance of having hope in a system that is truly fair, that is just, that is accountable, that is responsible, of course, and one that is fair. So Will we see changes following Seville? I think there's a high marginal possibility that there will be room for improvement, because a lot of governments now are coming together and they're becoming very clear. They're united in understanding that there's certain inequalities in the world that we must get rid of. So SDGs is helping eliminate some of these inequalities, and the SDG language finds itself in the Seville outcome. The outcome on combating illicit financial flows, which 10 years ago was not on the table in terms of heavy discussions, but we're beginning to see those discussions come out very clearly. So base erosion, profit shifting, tax avoidance, aggressive tax planning, all this, governments have agreed, have eroded the domestic revenue space of many developing countries, including European countries and the United States. And they have agreed that we need to be able to combat these forms of IFFs. So yes, there is hope, but that hope has to be pushed. We have to stand together. We have to resonate on principles, and we have to create a system that actually works for us going forward. So Seville outcome in terms of trade, tax, debt, international cooperation, and science, technology, and innovation, there seems to be good progress that we're going to be seeing spiral out in the few years to come.
You've talked about replacing IMF and World Bank with another institution. Bearing in mind that these institutions have been here for decades, they are ingrained in the economic culture of every country on the planet. Would this work actually? On paper it seems to work, but would it work in reality?
So institutional building is never easy, right? People create institutions, they either work, they don't work. Dismantling institutions is also not easy, but it's not like we can't create new institutions and we can't dismantle existing ones. What I want you to understand is the problem that IMF and the World Bank represent. Half of the world, and I don't want to talk about, countries outside the African continent. I'm from Africa and I want to speak about the African continent. At the time at which the Bretton Woods institutions were being set up, Africa was under colonial rule. By the time we have the IMF and the World Bank, Africa was under colonial rule. So by the time we became independent, we were already working within an ecosystem, a legal system, an institutional design that had already been established prior to us having any agency and autonomy in deciding the principles and functions and even the architecture of these institutions. So the World Bank and the IMF are colonial products. They promote colonial ideologies. Their norms were founded by the former colonial masters. So these institutions, 60, 70 years down the line, they still perpetuate their extractive models. We've been hearing conversations from the former Prime Minister of Senegal from here yesterday at the discussion that we had, who basically said, thinking about debt, the IMF and the World Bank provide countries with debt. Why is it that they charge a higher interest rate to African countries compared to European countries? Is that equal? Is that legitimate? And then how come many African countries are pushed to be able to get rid of their social protection programs, to dismantle their social welfare systems, to limit their financing of socio-economic rights simply for the purposes of servicing debt? That's not legitimate. That is not fair. So yes, somebody can argue and say World Bank and IMF are here. They've been here for such a long time. How can you dismantle this institution? But they're promoting inequalities. They're promoting an extractive model you haven't seen in the 60 or 70 years of their existence prior to post-colonization of Africa. You're not seeing African countries develop. If they're developing in a very tension-related atmosphere. So these institutions are not fit for purpose. They must be replaced. Now, how are we going to replace this? We can do that, but we have to put our minds together. And Seville is the right forum to be able to have this discussion going forward.